swing, and it is good! Bears win at the buzzer!
And welcome to another episode of the Turn Up For What podcast, talking your Houston Texans straight from the Great British Isles. We're back this week. Apologies for the absence last week. After 4 years, the flu got in the way of me being able to probably speak and not cough down the microphone, so still not fighting 100%, nor is this Houston Texans team, but we've got some safe hands to try and guide us through. If it makes some sense yesterday, and a first time guest, delighted to be joined by Shaun Bijani. John, how you doing?
Good. Thanks so much for having me, man. And I know the outcome wasn't what we all wanted to see in week 3 or 2 or 1, as they played some really close games to start this season. But it's definitely good to be talking some ball and have some sort of normalcy in our life again. Yeah,
no, definitely. I think it's kind of weird because I was reflecting upon it this morning a little bit, and I thought, well, this season was going to be about rookie, younger player development storylines sort of interwoven into games. You probably weren't going to win too many games. I think people got ahead of themselves, as every fan base does, and then reality slaps you in the face like it does again yesterday, and it has done each of the 3 of the first weeks. But I didn't think we, as a football team, considering how close we've come in these games, and predominantly that's been because of the opposition and their shortcomings and misgivings rather than anything we've done particularly, but I didn't think we'd come this far from winnable games coming out almost completely empty-handed if you don't count the tie.
Yeah, I'm actually pretty impressed with the ability that they've had to stay in some games to start this season. And look, 3 straight opportunities for Davis Mills in this offense to drive the field, go down, tie, and or win a game in the first 3 weeks. It's not been pretty, not once, not at all. It's been pretty ugly. But they've had an opportunity to win games. And that, to me, is pretty incredible, considering how putrid the offense has been, how predictable at times. We talk about so much about the creativity of this Pep Hamilton offense. It's looked creative at times, but I think he's underutilizing some of his players and strengths and skill sets on this team so far. And we're not seeing a full arsenal of it. I feel like they're treating some of their younger players with kid gloves, so to speak. And by some of their players, I just maybe mean one, Dameon Pierce at running back, because Derek Stingley, Jalen Petrie, that secondary, which is a rookie class from this year as well, they're kind of out there and they're allowed to make some mistakes and they're going to learn from just game reps. Well, I'm trying to figure out, as we navigate through the early half of the season, why they're not really letting Dameon Pierce do the same when they don't have a number 2 running back even close to the same skill set that he's bringing in weaponry.
Yeah, and he didn't help himself, fumbling twice yesterday, and I think that's the trouble. But yeah, I suppose it's a strange kind of setup of a team, because it felt like they certainly made the soundings that they tried to forge an identity. They would try and run the ball, but when you're trying to run the ball with not a single established quality reps, quality tape running back in this league, you don't have one because your main guy's a rookie. It kind of feels a bit disjointed. I think we've kind of seen in the way in which they've slipped away in games that were very winnable. I think you'd almost seen that disjointedness that they certainly wouldn't admit in terms of the team, in terms of front office, in terms of the coaching staff. They obviously want to put out positive soundings, but I think there's been a lot of disjointed parts of it, no more so particularly offense. Because if I actually show them that the Texans or strengths or their main selling point this season is what, and I don't know the answer.
Their main selling point this season, you're saying?
Yeah. What's their strength? What's their game based on? They'll tell you the running game. Yeah.
For this team, their strength is clearly their defense. And really, that's kind of been the case, I would say, since training camp. It was easy to see. I've been out there every single day, watch these guys in practice, and that's been very evident from the way that they talk, the way that they look, the vibe in the locker room, just the vibe from the players on either side of the ball. It's clearly the defense. And look, I know the run defense hasn't been pretty. In fact, it's been not good. Okay. However, when you are unable to move the ball okay, and sustain drives. Your defense is out on the field quite a bit. So I'll give them a little bit of that. But I will just say this: their linebacker core, and you can't really say the guys up front. I know Roy Lopez is a second-year player, and Kurt Hinish, who didn't play yesterday, is an undrafted rookie. But they've got some veterans, on that defensive front. Okay, guys that have been there, kind of done that before. But when you go look at Kame Grugier-Hill, who was a tackling machine last year for the Texans, and this year he's a little banged up, but certainly the missed tackles by the linebacker core, they've leaked into the secondary. You've got Jonathan Owens and Jalen Petrie kind of cleaning those things up for you up the middle in the box on some of those plays that have broken through. So I think that's the problem with the linebacker core right now is just the missed tackle. Somebody asked me the other day, it's like, hey, man, do you think these guys just need to simply hit the weights? Like, what's going on? And it's like, I really don't think so. Like, it's not a question of, hey, this guy's bigger than me. And, just no. This team is made up of journeymen and young players. Okay. And some of those journeymen, just some of them, because there's some really good players on this team that I think can be a factor in the next 2 or 3 years when they're actually supposed to be very competitive. I just think there are some guys on this team that are just that, just another guy. And we're looking for almost perfection in tackling, perfection in play calling, perfection in throws and catches and runs and yards after the catch. You got to remember who you're watching here. You're watching a team that is coming off a back-to-back 4-win season. Last year wasn't the first year of a rebuild. It was the last year of a teardown.
Yeah.
And now you've got fresh blood, new thinking, new meat in the locker room. And you got to figure out a way to make that taste good this year.
Yeah.
And 3 straight games competitive with an opportunity to go win out of the gate to start the season. I got to tell you, if they played every single game of the season like this and lost them all, I would be ecstatic because they're competitive, they're entertaining, and they weren't supposed to be either one of those two things.
Yeah, and I think certainly on the defensive side of the ball, I suppose from a developmental viewpoint, you can stomach that because ultimately, part of your development as a defensive player will to be unsuccessful. Missed tackles. Like you said, Jonathan Owens isn't a starting caliber safety in this league, but he's certainly put his body in there. He's missing tackles, but he's making a lot. But like you were saying, I think that the amount of tackles, I think it's just the amount of traffic that is getting through the front seven. I think, for me, Lopez not done as well this year, which is a shame to see. I think he's just not able to disengage with blocks. Malik Collins has been particularly quiet. So that front two defensive tackle tandem, whether it's been the ones and even worse so at times the twos with Michael Dwumfor, I think they just can't stop the run. And even when they try and come down, bring extra men in the box, it makes no difference. And I think 270 or 280 yards it was for the Bears yesterday on the ground, which is just inexcusable at any level. Is difficult when that is the strength, like you said, Shaun, and I do agree with you. That is the strength of your team, and it's got a better mix of veterans and some aspiring young players. But when you're so structurally flawed like that, it's going to be tough sledding. And I think if you'd played against a team who could throw a bit, because certainly Justin Fields gave you a good reminder of certainly some of the shortcomings in terms of the passing game. But if you'd played against other teams yesterday with that level of breakdown in the run game, I think you would have, the score probably would have been a lot far separated than it was. Right until the end of the fourth quarter there. But so in terms of the defensive pluses, I think if we try and take away the plus, because I don't think there's many on offense, and we'll probably spend the majority of the time talking about that. But I thought for me, Jalen Petrie, 2 interceptions, gets a sack on Justin Fields late in the game. He did a lot to try and keep this team in it. And I think perhaps he was probably the standout for the Texans yesterday. Certainly from the stat column, he's still missing tackles, still gets a bit heavy, plays like he's about 30 pounds heavier at times, and that just continues to worry me. But he looks like a playmaker, and it's great to see that coming to fruition.
He looks like he definitely belongs. Definitely belongs. And you could kind of tell that in the preseason. You got a little glimpse, but you never know if it's like a guy just kind of flashing, because we see that all the time, Okoronkwo looked like an absolute beast in the preseason, and we're like, holy smokes, if this guy can bring the pass rush like that during the regular season, you better look out. And where's he been? But Petrie, you could tell in every game that he's played, weeks 1, 2, and then yesterday's 3, he's just gotten better and more physical and more involved. Yesterday with the 2 interceptions, a couple of sacks, 2 passes defensed, 8 tackles, 5 solo. He was all over the place. And they needed him to be. I mean, my gosh, if he wasn't, putting his hat in there in the second level on some of those runs by Montgomery and Herbert, then I don't know what their total would have been yesterday. If he's not picking those 2 passes off from Fields, I don't know what his total is scampering yesterday, because Fields was able to, in some obvious passing downs, tuck the ball down, pull it, and just go run. They ran so many times, the Chicago Bears did, in obvious passing downs yesterday. It was just kind of scary. And I really thought that they were going to look to test the Texans' young secondary, as Matt Ryan and Russell Wilson did in weeks 1 and 2. Fields did, obviously, a little bit, and with the 2 picks, and those are some bad throws. One that he made to Cole Met, and I can't remember the other. I think it was I can't remember the other receiver's name. Mooney, I think it was. And so, look, both of those were very, poor throws on Justin Fields' part, and Petrie was there to clean them up. But I really kind of put an emphasis on predictability, and that's what we've talked so much about with the Texans offensively. And I think the Bears are so good on the run game that they said, hey, we're supposed to pass here, but we're going to run here. And they let you know that very early on in the game yesterday. And they didn't care if it was the second quarter, third quarter, fourth quarter. We're going to run it right down your throat because you can't stop us. 2nd and 10, 3rd and long, doesn't matter. David Montgomery will get it. Okay. Abear will get it. Okay. Ebner will get it. It doesn't matter. Fields will pull it and he'll go get it himself. And that's what you got to fix if you're the Texans defense. But Petrie's performance yesterday, they can learn a thing or two from him, because he doesn't give up. He finished that game. He put his hat in there on every single play. And the way that he talked after the game yesterday, where it was like, it's a stepping stone. It's just that we didn't win today. And next week, I want to go win, and I want to go play better, and I want to get more. That's the mentality that you want every single one of those young players to have. And he's the leader at the forefront there.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think he comes across like that in his interviews as well, and I think we just need more of these guys come and step up. I don't think it wasn't really a game for Stingley yesterday in the run game. Certainly wasn't tested, like you said. But the physicality up front, I think, is what concerns us the most. I think in terms of stopping this run, if that's something we can't address, whether it's schematically, whether it's bringing extra men up to the line or something, but every team watching that from here on out is going to say, well, let's just keep running it until they can't. And I think if the more teams do that, because Denver let us off with one, really, because if they kept going, I think, again, the score would have been very different. Well, somewhat different if you watched any other game last night. But I think, there's a blueprint there, and a very clear one, and a very kind of rudimentary one, if you like, to go and really bully this team up front. And I don't know where the answers come from, Shaun, to be honest.
Well, you make an interesting point. There's teams that are going to be looking at. You have 3 weeks of scout film now. Okay, they're going to look back and see where the holes are, where they're able to exploit the Texans defensively, in particular in the run. Well, you look at the upcoming schedule, and I just glanced at it yesterday. If you've got it in front of you, obviously they got the Chargers next week. Yeah. Their run game, not very good. They're banged up. They got blown to pieces yesterday by the Jacksonville Jaguars too. So like. Pretty 3 quick strikes there, against the Chargers heading into a week 4 game against the Texans, that if you're a Texan fan, you kind of, you're kind of side-eyeing that a little bit. You're like, that's not looking too bad. Maybe we got another chance here getting a win. You do. But over the course of the next 2 or 3 weeks, as what we've seen from teams so far to start this season, run games for them, not good. Texans run defense for themselves, not good. So what gives? That was a question I kind of asked yesterday going into the Bears game. And, hey, look, emerging Dameon Pierce, he's running really well. And the Bears, David Montgomery, he was running the ball really well. What kind of gives? Whose run defense is going to break and bend, first? Obviously, it was the Texans. They decided to do more through the air than that of the Bears, vice versa. I think it's going to be very interesting. We're going to learn a lot more about this football team, but every football team over the course of the next 2 to 3 weeks and see exactly then what your real strengths and weaknesses are. Right now, I'm pretty confident in saying that all season long, your strength on this team will be your defense so long as your key pieces stay healthy, and Stingley and Petrie and Owens. But most importantly, your guys up front in that pass rush. Jerry Hughes has been a massive disruptor for the Texans to start this season and has forced quarterbacks out of the pocket, did Fields a number of times yesterday, Christian Kirksey, Kami Grugier-Hill. I mean, the pressure's coming from different places all over the place. Jonathan Grenard's another one, who created a lot of disruption in the backfield, missed some more opportunities yesterday in the games. Those are the missed tackles. But you're going to figure out who this team really is in the next 2 or 3 weeks. But just don't fall asleep. Don't be surprised is what I'm saying if the Texans' run defense, looks like the 85 Bears in the next couple of weeks because of the lesser opponents and who they're playing.
Yeah. Yeah, I suppose there's that, and then the Jags before the bye week. In terms of, we'll just round up on the defense. I think it's certainly the pressure up front. I think has been a pleasant surprise. Jerry Hughes particularly, 33, being able to get pressure consistently. It's been reasonable. 5 sacks yesterday. I think you can't really ask for more than that in the defense. I think, but there's an element of your defense is only as good as the limited snaps you put it out there for. And you could have the 2011, 2012 Texans vintage in it. It would probably struggle and may keep the points tally down a little bit more than it has done, Shaun. But I think the big issue and the thing that we probably can't get away from and probably everybody's wanting to listen to us talk about is the offense. Before we get to too much specifics, where do you think the fault lies for this offense? Why does it look reasonable at times and then fade so badly? And what do you think the consistency and the fluency that just simply isn't there? What do you attribute that to?
It's you can't put one finger on one thing. We talked to Lovie Smith about this a couple of weeks ago. The media has an opportunity on Fridays to have a conversation that is off the record, but it's not really. He's a little bit more frank with us. And we asked him particularly about the offense's struggles and the lack of chemistry in the pass game. What's going on with Mills and Nico Collins, who was seemingly non-existent from the game yesterday. I mean, he got 4 targets and 2 catches, the last check with maybe a series or 2 left in the game yesterday. And I'm like, really? When? Yeah. I didn't notice it. And I say that because, when you talk about continuity between Mills and his receivers, anybody named outside of Brandon Cooks, but in particular Nico Collins, he's supposed to be stepping up and a legitimate number 2 weapon for the Texans this year. Year 2 for both of those guys. They've got a year under their belt. They spent a lot of time together in the offseason, went up to Oregon with the team building activity, and everything was sounding really good. And they're doing this, that, and the other thing. And Nico looks like he's working really hard every single day in practice and working on his hands. And it's just not happening play call-wise either. Lovie Smith said, well, if you ask Nico Collins, what do you think he would tell you? And he said, well, he's just not doing a good job of getting open. If you ask David Mills, what do you think he would tell you? Well, he's just not throwing Nico Collins open. And if you ask Pep Hamilton what's going on with the offense, well, I'm not calling, good enough plays in the plays to get these guys open. That's what's happening. It's the play calling. It's the playmaking ability from Davis Mills and these receivers. But it's also the decision making. I can't stress enough how I understand you're a rookie if you're Dameon Pierce, but he's done some really good things and been really impressive. And his carries have incrementally gone up the first 3 games. 20 carries yesterday for 80 yards. That's really good production. Second half, not so much. He was 6 for 18. The Bears obviously started to key in on that. But what did the Texans do? In obvious passing situations, they were passing the ball. They were not utilizing one of their best weapons offensively out of the backfield as a pass catcher in Dameon Pierce. There was no deception. There was no motion. They decided to go with passing in obvious passing situations and check down numerous times to Rex Burkhead, who, when he's in the
Yeah.
game, you know that's exactly what they're going to do. So it's predictability, it's
Yeah.
lack of deception, it's lack of motion and creativity in important times. In balanced lines, you can look at all of that stuff, but at the end of the day, when you're not making the defense think for 1 millisecond, is this run or pass? Oh, where's this guy going? You know, are we balanced up? Do we need to make a right call, a left call? What do we need to do? If you're not making them think for 1 second, then you're losing that snap every single time. You're not doing your job.
There was two plays, just to touch on a couple of points you picked out. There was two plays, both in the red zone. I think in the totality we ended up with 3 points out of those two trips. The first one was after the Jalen Petrie interception. Go down there. Nico's lined up one-on-one on the outside, the left-hand side of your screen, isolated against the defensive back. And there's a single safety floating, Eddie Jackson, who ultimately Mills decides to throw the ball into traffic, bounces off somebody's helmet, and Jackson intercepts it. And 0 points of a turnover, which this team is not in a position to be able to do. This team, if they get a turnover, they have to score points. You have to cash in that momentum. And then a second play in the red zone. I think it was the final trip they took in just the end of the third quarter. Didn't get back there again. And they try and isolate Rex Burkhead against Joe Thomas, which I believe is the same Joe Thomas that was here last year. In space, can't beat him to the pylon, gets tackled, end up kicking 3. So if your third down back can't beat a journeyman guy who wasn't even good enough for your squad in a one-on-one isolated matchup, he's not fit for the role. And just like in the first play that I mentioned there, if Davis Mills can't size up Nico Collins, I think that's a good matchup. Let's go and try it. Outside fade, put it up there, see what he's got for one of the plays, because they still had another down to go after that. It just feels like, I asked that earlier, what do you think the one thing is? And obviously it's a myriad of issues and problems, but from the quarterback's decision making to the utilisation of the skill position guys, or the lack of talent in some of the cases, and the way those guys are being schemed up, it's just a fucking terrible mess right now, and it's really tough to watch. And I think yesterday was one of the times you just thought, I can understand why people would turn this off or stick the red zone on, because as the game got on, it just, on those last couple of drives, it never at any point, Shaun, when they got the ball set, did I think late on, is this team going to go and put a drive together and win the game here for us when it's sitting at 20-all?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point. I asked Lovie Smith and Pep Hamilton and Davis Mills, actually all three of them this last week, about the fourth quarter struggles, in particular inside 2 minutes, opportunity to go down, tie, and win a game late, clutch moments. And I didn't really put too much emphasis on their responses, because I started thinking to myself, in all of those questions, well, you're not doing it, in the first 52 minutes of the ball game. Never mind, crunch time, the last 7, 8, 9 minutes, inside 2 minutes. If you're not doing it during the rest of the ball game, your third down conversion rate has been putrid. Mills has not been able to make the simple throws. He hasn't had all the time in the world to go through his progressions, so he'll panic and throw a check down. Your check downs should be wide open. Your check down is usually your running back, running somewhere in the flat, in the short to intermediate passing area, right? That last line of hope. You need to get the ball out. And so many times, like, Rex Burkhead is covered. Dameon Pierce is covered. That shouldn't happen. So what is that telling you? That's telling you Davis Mills has had, I believe, and I don't know the numbers from yesterday, but I think you said the 7th and 8th fewest or shortest amount of time to get rid of a football. Okay? So there's a reason why those guys are covered in the flats and in the short routes, because you're not able to finish your progression through your receivers. They're not able to finish their routes. You're just having to kind of panic and get a ball out. And it's a problem with the offense's concept. It's a problem with the protection. It's a problem with a quarterback that doesn't know how to manipulate the pocket. How many times have you seen Davis Mills step up in the pocket and
Yeah.
really lean into a throw? How many times have you seen Davis Mills, move around No, he gets those happy feet and oh, I got to get it out. And look, I don't want to kill the guy for that because yesterday against the Bears on the road at Soldier Field was his 14th NFL start. That's the same exact amount of games that the guy played his entire college career in a shortened 6 or 7 game, final season at Stanford in 2020 when COVID was screwing everything up. I mean, the guy's had a hell of a run, um, like so many other players. And not everybody has that clutch gene. Not everybody can just come right in and snap to it and you look like you belong. But I also don't think it's completely fair at all to say Davis Mills doesn't belong. I think the sample size is too small. And I think the NFL and football in general, man, it's about right time, right place, right situation. And unfortunately for Davis Smith, and sometimes if you're in the wrong either one of those three to start a career and you're so young, you can be broken. Okay. And I hope that's not the case for Davis Mills, but I think I almost get the feeling like he's in the wrong offense because I kind of like what Pep's doing. I just think it'd be better if you had a more confident, more slightly athletic quarterback to do things. And having a better skill set of receivers too would certainly make things a little easier for Davis Mills.
Yeah, I think for me, I think and I've never at any point subscribed to. I think Davis Mills would be the answer. I think you can tell pretty quickly, regardless of experience, regardless certain guys have just got it, and I've never at any point watched them and gone, yeah, that's just that's. There's been a couple little flashes here and there, but I always go back, and a lot of people disagree with me on this, Sean, but I find the five game at the end of last season a bit of a romantic notion. I didn't really watch those games and think, particularly the San Francisco game. You look at the good barometer, quality opposition, couldn't move the ball, and you could move the ball against a team that had the most injuries in the league in Tennessee Titans for only 2 quarters. And you could move the ball against a team that had all the players out from injury and no pass rush and had a linebacker standing up on the end of a 4-man front. So of course you were going to have success that day when Rex Burkhead rushes for a career high. So when you take those contexts, you think, okay, well actually, has he done it against anybody good? No. Has he ever done it for 4 quarters? No. Has he ever won you a game or even looked like winning you a game from the jaws of defeat? Absolutely not. I mean, it's so far away from that right now. So look at it, and everybody wants him to succeed. And if he did, this would change this team's trajectory in terms of team building. But he just looks so far off the pace of where you need to be. But the problem is, it's unfair on him, as you said, because he's not in many starts. The expectations from some people were just ludicrous based on what he's done. But then you've also got to have the wider context of how good this AFC is, and if they're not an instant, can kick the doors in, not necessarily from season one, but unless you've got something special, you're always going to be in the outside looking in. And if you're not necessarily going to go and compete for championships in the AFC, why are you wasting the time? Now that's not to say he can't get better and do things and change the way he plays and with a better team around him. Absolutely, could he be? But I think can he transcend, or does he need people to pull him along? And he's definitely not a guy who can transcend lesser talent, because you've seen that this year. But I struggle though, because everybody was excited for a new offense, fresh, different. Tim Kelly, get the old Bill O'Brien playbook out. But in that context with Pep Hamilton, I struggle to put, apart from confidence, Sean, what's been at the core of his regression this year, Davis Mills?
The core of Mills's regression, from a personal standpoint, like I think he would probably tell you that he's not making the same throws that he made last year. Some of those sideline throws, the shorter intermediate throws. I think that would tell you that, hey, I need to make more plays, and he said as much. Aside from that, if we're looking at this outside looking in, the core of his issue is, I think, just a bad situation.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, because there's times, yesterday, Hi, Philip Dorsett. Good to see you. Where have you
Yeah,
been? Mills throws a freaking laser his way down the right sideline, and it was a great catch. Boom, toe tap by
yeah.
Dorsett. And, like, hey, you didn't make that throw once at all last week, and you looked pretty earlier when you tried to find Cooks and you airmailed him in that same situation. It's those things, but Dorsett is a freaking athlete. The guy just gets open. Okay, that's why you brought him here, and I almost think Pep Hamilton, is just. Let me put it to you this way: before the season started, we had many conversations about, all right, yeah, Davis Mills numbers, they can look a little inflated last year, and everybody was talking about the quarterback rating and efficiency the last 5 games, and he went, 2-3, and you can manipulate those things to look how you want them to look. Best red zone quarterback
Yeah.
rating in the NFL. Stop it. You know, that's almost like in Major League Baseball. Like, hey, he's got, uh, the most strikeout. He's got the best strikeout to walk ratio in a minimum of 100 innings pitched. What's the minimum for Davis Mills in red zone attempts? Because he's right there. They don't go to the red zone. They're terrible. So I don't care about those numbers, but is Davis Mills in a position to succeed? And so many times people want to talk about, well, receivers and, look at his weapons. Like, no, he's not. Exactly. No, he's not. He didn't have anybody besides Brandon Cooks. And you get this brand new shiny toy that you don't want to scratch up too much and you don't really trust a whole lot in Dameon Pierce. Well, when that's your problem, you're also not putting Davis Mills in a position to succeed when you cannot keep a consistent offensive line together. Justin Britt, I know he's going through some things. It's not his fault. Quessenberry gets banged up yesterday within the first few plays, and you can't even hold on to that notion that, hey, for the first time since week 4 of the 2021 season, the Texans have been able to start the same offensive line in back-to-back games. It's been that long, and then boom, no Quessenberry. Put in Jimmy Morrissey, and he looks completely lost on some combo run games, outside zone stuff where Green's still, needing to pull. He makes just egregious mistakes instead of playing football at the end of the day. You can get out leveraged, but you better put your mitts on somebody. Well, he got out leveraged and didn't touch anybody so many times yesterday in run blocking situations that what are we doing here? You got elevated to the active roster from the practice squad. What are you doing on the practice squad? And those are the frustrating things, is that's not putting Davis Mills in the position to succeed. So that's what I think is at the core of his issue.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I always sit and grind all 22 every week, just for my own. I don't know what you would describe it as, but I certainly, when I looked at the last two, and obviously it's not out yet for this week, but I keep seeing that, and everyone's saying, no, the receivers aren't open, but certainly from the plays where Mills has either sailed the ball or incompletions, was it a fact that there was 5 guys in the route? If you got, set a 5 wide set, are they all open? No, they're not, but no team is. But there's definitely a lot of times where he just makes the wrong decision and doesn't understand the coverage, doesn't let it develop. And you saw that no more so than that interception that killed the game yesterday, right to Roquan Smith. When you watch it from the camera angle behind the end zone, Nico Collins is coming free. He just doesn't let the play develop, doesn't recognise the play, airmails it to the fact that a linebacker who's 260, I think Roquan Smith, can take 4 steps, read the ball, and then beat your running back to the ball. When Nico Collins is coming uncovered because it's a zone look across the formation, and he'd be wide open, and you're still on the field. Now, don't get me wrong, they weren't moving the ball well at that point. It didn't look like they were going to score. They miraculously managed to kill time off the clock when they still had 2 timeouts. But I think his reading of the game, for whatever, from my point of view, from the All-22 in the last couple of weeks, Shaun, I'm keen to look at this one because everybody says, oh, the offensive line isn't great, and it isn't great. But ultimately, if you get the ball out quick and you understand the coverage, you understand where the holes are going to be, then you can drop the ball in there. And you might get a 6-yard completion, but it's better than hitting the person in the first row dropping a ball in their popcorn, because that's about the time every time it tries to go into the sideline. That's basically what's happened so far this year. So I think people don't respect his deep ball because he's just not shown it. There's not been any completions. The 10 to 20 yard range, it just almost looks like he just can't do it for whatever reason, beyond a couple of big strikes here and there. But I think his reading of the game and his reading of coverages and his reading of his receivers and being on the same page just hasn't been there. So I think that's a big part of it, and I don't know where that comes from, because at times last year it was good, but you've got Philip Dorsett there, like you said. He took less snaps than Jordan Aikens yesterday. So I think for all the utilization of okay, you've got a limited assets, but they are sure as hell not being sweated in an appropriate way by Pep to get maximum value. And I think whether that's in formations, whether that's in just matchups alone, I think it it epitomised itself yesterday for me, Shaun. The play before Jordan Aikens scored the touchdown, who actually looked more athletic and more like an NFL level type threat than a lot of our guys, to be honest, which I think says a lot about the quality we've got. But he catches that pass. But the play before that, they've got a three tight end personnel set on the field. Philip Dorsett, one of his 13 snaps, sitting out alone. Play gets blown up. Then it gets to a third and one in the third quarter when they kicked that field goal. Well, that was the play where 4 Bears tackled Dameon Pierce in the backfield. Exact same formation, already seen it, didn't work. All they did was shift it to the other side. Easy, simple stuff for a defensive coordinator at this level. And so I think the big part that Pep will, and that we'll have to reflect upon this week, and I hope, I'm sure Lovey and other people will be helping him with that, but I think the fact Pep needs to be able to find a way to find stuff that works, but then also when stuff doesn't work, let's not be scared to go and try, let's go and try and move in different directions, because you've seen that the last couple of weeks, third and short, third down calls, when the play's on the line, when the focus is on, when it's not just your average first down where you can get a bit more loose, people are just in base coverage and there's 2 or 3 options to you, but when it's something really specific and you've got to go and have the play, this offense has not looked prepared. It's not looked to use the players on this roster in any way that's shape or form that's effective. And I think for Pep, I think that's going to be his biggest disappointment to this, that he can't use the guys, albeit the talent levels aren't the best, but he can't use them in a way that makes other people successful. And I think that's got to be the fundamental aspect of a good offensive coordinator, is just getting a little bit of a tune out of each part of your offense. And it just seems worlds away from that right now.
A couple of instances, I just want to make a few quick points. All good stuff that you just said. I think NFL coaches overthink themselves, and almost give opposing defenses a little too much credit, because at the end of the day, it's not the coaches on the field, it's the players on the field. And players, are just very reactionary, and they're just going boom, boom, boom. So tempo can change a little bit of this too. There were instances yesterday where Chris Moore, boom, seam routes, crossing routes, little overs and unders that they were running. I mean, my gosh, they were flashing wide open, and Mills found, Conley and Moore. It's like, boom, boom. It's like, hey, here we go. This is the stuff that he was hitting Collins on, last week, on those little seam routes. Let's go, run seam to seam and try to take that high safety, and you flash open in the middle of the field. You don't need a lot of time to throw those guys open, because they're literally supposed to flash open in between the hashes, which happened a couple of times yesterday. And it depends, if you're running from the numbers, a seam route to the hash, generally you could flash open between the numbers and the hash. And depending on where his progressions are, maybe in between the hashes again. So I just think there's some opportunities for Mills to look at some of those guys. But you can't be afraid to go back to the well if the play works for you. And I think, yes, I put myself in that situation, and I've been a play caller at very lower levels, high school and middle school football and stuff, but you're overthinking yourself. It's like, well, I just ran this play and I got this one that'll do the same thing, and I want to see what that looks like. And if I do run the same play, then they're going to know that, and I don't really have anything to go off of that. You start overthinking things. You mentioned two things in particular. I think it was 3rd and 1 situation yesterday with Dameon Pierce. The Texans allowed 9 defenders in the box. When you're telling a defense, like, hey, here's what we're going to do, and you're going to bring an 8th and a 9th guy in the box, your chances aren't going to be good. I don't care if you've got Dameon Pierce or Walter Payton as your running back. It doesn't matter. Like, somebody's going to make a play, and it's probably not going to be your running back.
Yeah.
The Texans did that so many times last week, dude, where I felt like they became so predictable. You bring an extra defender in the box just because you had a little success on it before. Well, it was a different situation. I'll take 9 guys in the box, 8 guys in the box when I need 2 yards on a 2nd and 2 versus I need 6 yards on a 3rd and 6. You can't spread things out. If you're going to tell the defense, like, hey, we're going to run right here, at least spread things out so you can give the most athletic player on your offense an opportunity to make a guy miss, put his head down, and go run through somebody. And I don't think Pep fully trusts his players. And I also don't think he really trusts his ability to call plays in certain situations. I think the wheel's spinning up there, but it's going at an incredibly fast rate. And I think he's just not figured it out yet, if that makes sense. Yeah. You think about it, he hasn't been an offensive coordinator since his days at Indianapolis. These things, it's repetition. It's a pulse, and he hasn't had it. Lovie Smith, same thing. He hasn't coached the defense in 7 years at the NFL level from the perch of head coach. It takes time. It's repetition, but it also comes down to the players and knowing when and who not to trust in terms of your skill set, guys.
Yeah, and I mean, there was end of the first half. They get the ball back, and I think it was 1:48 on the clock. I think they had 2 timeouts, and all 3 plays, at least 2 or 3 of the routes are short, in cut, 3-4 yard in cuts when you're trying to get down the field when the clock's ticking. And it just felt like the situational awareness or the situational preparedness of the playbook in those situations just doesn't look like it's there. It's unless it's a case of they're scared to turn the ball over. But we've done that now. We've ripped the band-aid off of that. We've made some terrible turns. You've literally given the game away in the worst possible style against a team who are not good. But I think it just looked like at times Pep's just not ready to call those plays at the moment, and whether that's confidence in his players, like you said, if that's confidence in the matchups, whether that's confidence in himself, or just not being ready and organised, I don't know. But it just is a sorry mess where a quarterback doesn't look confident. I don't know if that thumb injury is causing him issues in terms of holding and releasing the ball, because his accuracy and his awareness of the field is so down. I don't think the line's particularly bad. I think ultimately in this level, if you take 1 sack in a game, I think it's pretty it's good living, as in the grander scale of things. So there just seems a lot here in this offense. How do they fix it? Shaun, how do you what are the steps they can take to try and fix it, make it more serviceable when you're in these tight games? You've got a chance of perhaps getting something from them that we've not done the first 3 weeks.
Yeah, I mean that's a really good question, and you don't want all of these things that we're talking about to really be invalid. Okay, at the end of the day, like there's a lot of complaints that we have, there's a lot of criticisms that we have, but are they are they valid ones? That's what I always think about is, well, should we really expect this staff, these players, to be able to do this, to be able to do that, to be able to make those adjustments? I think the first 3 weeks, if they've told you anything, is that you've got the guys on this team, whether they're young or old, that have the grit and have the want to. Go back and listen to what Roy Lopez, you mentioned him earlier. Go look at his commentary after the game yesterday. He said, hey, he figured out yesterday, you really have to want it for 60 minutes and probably more than that, to win in this league. And his comments, you listen to him or you read them, pretty telling. Like, hey, here's a second-year guy, and then go listen to what Jerry Hughes said. here's a 13-year veteran. These guys all want to win and believe that they should be winning. They very well could be 3-0 if
Yeah.
this, that, or the other thing happened. And my gosh, can you imagine? Can you imagine the storyline if the Houston Texans were 3-0 entering week 4 against the Chargers? Incredible stuff. Okay. And that's what the veterans are looking at. They know how wild and wacky the NFL is every single season within the first month because nobody knows who anybody is. You figure it out after 5, 6 games. So what can the Texans do to correct some of these things? Continue to play because they've got the veterans that if they're healthy, they're going to help these young guys win and not just win games. You have to win plays. That's what's really being forgotten because, the theme was the first couple of weeks from the coaches, the players, man, we don't know how to finish. We got to learn how to finish. These guys don't know how to win yet. We got to figure out how to win. Forget the games, okay? Because sometimes you do need a special guy at quarterback to go help you win a game that you're not supposed to win. And the Texans don't have that guy right now. They ain't figured out how to win a game with Davis Mills as their quarterback in a late game situation. They're doing all of the things necessary to give them a chance that you need something special to finish.
Yeah.
Now the defense has got to figure out a way to score the football. Lovie Smith has talked about that. He might be right. The wisdom of a guy. I mean, go figure, right? He needs his defense to score the football because if they do in a couple of these instances over the last 3 weeks, we're probably talking about changing the complexion of a ball game, stealing momentum, holding on to it, stiff arming an offense. If Petrie's able to, boom, take one to the house and give you a pick six, those are the things that could help you sneak and steal a ball game away. But winning certain plays, continuing to have your veterans buy in and just chase that carrot that's in front of them and let the young guys and the rookies follow. That's what's going to change. And that's what's going to kind of help this team grow. Because all of these criticisms, some of them I don't think are valid in regards to Mills. Some of them I don't think are valid in regards to Pep Hamilton because I don't think they belong together. I think it just kind of is what it is, and they're trying to make the best of it. But I will say this. They've got some guys on both sides of the football that are going to be a part of a winning football team in the city of Houston in the next 2 or 3 years. And I'm talking about Steven Nelson if they decide to pay him because he's certainly looking like a guy they should be looking at paying if they're going to be competitive next year and the year after. Derek Stingley's going to be here a while. Jalen Petrie's going to be here a while. You look at some of your offensive line. AJ Cann might not be here for a very long time. You're still going to need a center, but I like what Scott Quessenberry's done. Laramie Tunsil, if you want him to be, he's going to be here for a little while. Kenyon Green, going to be here for a little while. There are some pieces in all areas. Christian Kirksey, Jonathan Grenard, Kurt Heinisch might end up in a couple of 3 years being one of the coolest stories in the NFL for a massive disruptor up the middle, because I think he's got the tools to do that and the want to do that, along with Roy Lopez too. But everybody else, just another guys and some journeymen that are going to help take those young guys and get them to the point that you need them to be at to continue to grow. So that's kind of what I'm looking at. That should be and is valid to get this Texans team better and focused and headed in the right direction.
Yeah, and we'll certainly continue to see that evaluation of these guys throughout. But in terms of, like, for example, the Casario's first draft class, within the current climate of the first 3 weeks, if you had a case of Mills was slinging it to both Nico and Brevin, Wallow's out there making special team tackles, etc., the complexion of that draft class, and I think it's a 3-year evaluation before you kind of get a full handle on it, but certainly the complexion of that draft class certainly doesn't look as strong as the immediate one. And I was having this conversation last night, Shaun, watching the game, and one of my friends who watched it, he's not a big fan of Casario, never has been, and his point to me was, well, tell me a position that we won't have to draft at least twice in the next 2 years if we want to improve it. And I thought it was a really good point because, if you count guard, maybe perhaps, but if you think corner, you need 3 or 4 guys. Tackle, we're probably going to need at least 1 or 2 guys. I don't think Titus has been a big disappointment this year. And he said that to me, and he said, because his point was that he doesn't think Caserio's done a good job, and I don't think he's done a good job with salary cap. I think the talent management acquisition will find its way. Free agency is what it is. Next year's not going to be a big free agency year until the cap resets itself properly in 2024, and we've actually got requisite space, not just trying to fill the roster. But that was a good point I thought he made. He said, tell me a position that we're not going to have to draft high at least twice in the next couple of years if we're going to get it to a level that's that's the top end of competitiveness.
That's a really good discussion, and an interesting way to look at it. But corner, you're probably going to need to do that, and it just kind of depends on what you're going to get out of those guys, injury history, but the fact that there are so many of them. Drafting it high shouldn't necessarily be looked at like a bad thing, because if you're drafting tackles and corners and
edge rushers, that's the one I think.
Well, pass rushers, those are guys you'd kind of like to hold on to and have in your pocket in your arsenal already. But that's probably very likely because some of your best ones right now are aged veterans. And guys that you're just they're like lemons and you're trying to squeeze every ounce of juice out of them possible that they have left. So yeah, you're probably going to have to do that. But what about, beyond this upcoming draft? Okay. You should be able to get, let's say 2 drafts. You should be able to get those guys, a quarterback, another running back, edge rushers, maybe another safety, and a corner, pretty high, and you have some draft picks in the draft capital to be able to do that. If you need to stockpile some picks, get a number of 6s and a number of 4s and 2 1s next year, certainly the draft is yours. And I do trust Caserio in terms of being able to manipulate what he has, the amount of cash he has going into the grocery store, and the amount of groceries that he's able to come out with. I think he's been frugal's the wrong word, but efficient at spending his money, if you will, whether you're talking about draft capital, just making certain decisions. I like the draft the last couple of years, and I think he certainly has infused confidence into a front office that is so desperately lost credibility and respect for a long time with this Houston Texans organization. It just hasn't been there. And I'm talking, before the Jack Easterby thing and Cal McNair taking over, after his dad's passing. I mean, this goes even back when you had Rick Smith in his heyday as general manager of the Texans. There's just been a lot of issues. And I think the Texans are starting to turn a corner. And so that's the most important thing, because it needs its fan base back. And you've got to try to find a way to reel them in. And if playing competitive games when you're not supposed to is a way to do that, fine. But they're not doing it this year. More people in Houston are looking at losing and acquiring more draft picks. They really don't care about the season in terms of wins or losses this year, more so the losses than wins. And I always hate that mentality as an NFL fan, because I want to see competitive football. I want to see the guys that, are playing winning football that don't know how to win yet as a team that are here. I want to see guys like Jalen Petrie. I want to see guys like Kurt Heinisch and Roy Lopez, and Derek Stingley and Steven Nelson and Jonathan Owens, those guys that are making plays, Christian Kirksey, Jonathan Grenard, guys that are in year 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 that could be a part of something special here, be here and succeed. And those are the guys that you're really wanting to latch onto. In the NFL, it's tough. It's like, get us more draft choices, more draft. Well, you got to hit on those guys. And so I think it's going to take a couple of years, to be quite honest with you, before you get that fandom back, before you get that respect back, before you're able to realize what this organization can become again.
Yeah, I think so. I think it just perhaps puts a bit of a new complexion on what Caserio's done to this point. When you see it kind of unraveling, because I think if you have from that previous draft class, albeit it was small, albeit it was later round picks, but if you can hit on one or two of those guys, it starts to build the foundations and the formations of a roster that these next two classes will fill out in a way that hopefully they can be competitive. But I mean, there's a long way to go. I think if you do see anything between now and the end of the season, it's just getting the best assessment of what you have in these two draft classes. And the vet guys will come and go. As I said, I don't think there's many of them that'll be here. I don't think there's many you'll pay. I don't think there's many that other teams will pay. Like the Justin Britt deal, for example. Who was outbidding them on that? I don't know. Fully guaranteed to the end of the year when the guy was already gone. So, I think there's been a lot of misgivings and a lot of kind of short-term 1-2 year deals here and there. But as perhaps situation, circumstance have dictated that. But from my point of view, Shaun, hopefully as we go in the rest of these games, you want to just try and see the development of those guys in a way that is perhaps not as disastrous as your quarterback throwing an interception in the fourth quarter and giving them a chip field goal to win it. And I think that's perhaps where it leaves the sour taste. But as you said, I think you're spot on. Being competitive, this team being competitive, and against teams that probably had no right to, against a team that beat the Chiefs yesterday in Indianapolis, and a team that will play in a couple of weeks in the Jags, going to play the Chargers this weekend, which will be a good barometer because they don't travel well, so that's a good barometer of how many fans you actually have. But certainly they've not been necessarily going on all cylinders as we maybe thought they would have been. Their only win to date was against the Raiders, who would play after the bye, who are currently the only team beat us in the draft order as winless. But what are your expectations for the Chargers in terms of them coming in here? Obviously, Justin Herbert, and everybody wanted to remind everybody that Bills beat him last year, carrying a bit of a rib injury. He's, to me, when you see a guy throw a ball, it just looks effortless and it zips in with a level of accuracy that makes you sit up in your seat. He wasn't necessarily all that there last year. And they seem to underachieve. But what do you think? The Celtics, a game that they'll need to bounce back if they can get everything right. But what's your expectations going into the fourth week of this season, with hopefully a bit with some learnings and some improvements from the Texans?
Everybody else is going to improve too. Good teams that are supposed to be good teams, if they're healthy, they are who they're going to be. Through the first 4, 5, 6 weeks of the season, that's when you really that is that middle stage of you could kind of go either way, and it's very dictated upon health of your roster and players taking the next step and young players taking the next step. Look at Justin Herbert is healthy. He's a really good quarterback, and he's going to be a really good quarterback for a very long time. He's also a guy, though, that I think needs a pretty solid run game to succeed, because he's not somebody you want throwing the football 45 times a game. You don't really want any quarterback to do that. Peyton Manning, maybe, okay. There are some great quarterbacks over the years that I wouldn't mind seeing that from, but I expect the Chargers to be a good football team this year. It's a well-built roster, I think. They've got a lot of talent across the board on both sides of the football. I think they're good. I don't think it's fair to say that they're going to be a disappointment just based off of the first couple of weeks of the season and some plays here and some games there and just looking disastrous in week 3. I also don't think it's fair to say that the Texans, man, they're that close. Okay, yeah, they played some competitive games. They've had a chance to go down and win. They could be 3-0. Aha. But you don't think that the Chargers are going to be a little bit of salty after getting blown to bits week 3 against who did they lose to?
Against Jacksonville, yeah.
Jacksonville. There you go. 38-10. 38-10. You serious right now? That's not who that team is. That is not who that team is. They're going to be a little bit salty when they play the Houston Texans, and they're not going to be trying to hear, oh, hey, this is going to be a competitive game because look what the Texans have done the first. No. They're going to be looking to, who said this? Dan Campbell head coach of the Detroit Lions, bite your kneecaps off. They're going to be trying to absolute maul the Houston Texans in week 4. So if I'm the Texans, you're just trying to figure out a way to play good, clean football. And that's how I'm looking at this Chargers game coming up. You got to play clean football. You can't turn the football over. And that's where I really worry about Pep Hamilton and Davis Mills. Like, oh my gosh, after 2 interceptions, which are both kind of funky, tipped balls, well-defensed passes, they went for picks. They very easily could not have gone for interceptions, rather just poor decisions and incompletions in those particular times is what you could really have dumbed those down to at the end of the day. But my gosh, how much more is Pep Hamilton going to try to protect Davis Mills? That's my biggest concern against the Chargers, because I know the Chargers are good, and I know they're that close. They're that far away from trying to play it too safe if you're the Houston Texans and then making you pay. Whether it be a physical play defensively, an interception here or there, just pulling off a big play against the Texans' putrid run defense. Those are things that good teams that are looking to prove themselves. What do the Texans have to prove? What do they have to prove? They know people expect them to be bad. So 0-3, 0-2-1, it doesn't matter. So I look at a Chargers team and they're like, we're expected to be good, and it's time for us to show up or show out or get out. And I think the Chargers are going to come in hungry, and I think the Texans got to figure out a way to treat themselves like they do belong at the same time.
Yeah, and I think it's a great barometer. I think they've certainly got star power, and I think for Stingley to go up against a guy like Mike Williams, if for Tunsil, or if Titus Howard's going to awaken this season to going against Mack and Bosa, there's a lot of matchups in there that are against elite competition. And you remember when, actually, ironically, the Texans went to the Chargers when they were playing in wherever the hell that temporary stadium was, the MLS one they played, and that was Titus Howard's first game at right tackle. Him and Max Sharpen had great games against Melvin Ingram and Bosa. And it was kind of one of these things that it threw itself up as a bit of a surprise, but it tests yourself against the best, and then you can understand where you need to improve. And I think that the Chargers coming into town will certainly give us that, particularly in the passing game. It'll not be as much, he said, much as running game as we've seen in the last couple of weeks. And I think it's a test for the Texans to reassess, but also put themselves against a team who's generally considered a contender in the AFC. So yes. There's a lot to be uncovered. But Shaun, any last words before we head out of here this week? It's been a bit of a somber occasion when you cough up a loss in the fourth quarter. But any final thoughts?
Yeah, just be encouraged, because this team right now kind of harkens back to what they were doing, 3, 4, 5, 6 years ago. They were playing competitive football, and you expected them to do just that. Coming into a season in which from a fan base is year one, the real year one of a rebuild. What happens this year is going to do a lot of things. Okay, you're gonna figure out like who are some guys you want to keep? What have drafts looked like in the last couple of years for you? Who are some guys you can continue to build with? And who is your quarterback? And I think you're starting to kind of figure that out after the first 3 weeks. But just be encouraged, because you're playing competitively ugly football. Okay? I said to myself after the game yesterday, boy, this team, they competitively suck. That's kind of how I took it. They competitively suck. But then I was like, no, I'm not going to say they suck. Because they got some good coaches, they got some good players on both sides of the ball, whatever, and they're playing for the most part clean football. The 2 picks yesterday by Mills, they could have gone either way. Incompletions, picks, could have been a touchdown if he throws that ball just a hair sooner to Brandon Cooks in the end zone, and maybe just doesn't throw to Rex Burkhead at all anymore, which would be nice. But competitively ugly. That's how I'll dumb it down. Competitive. Yeah. You can't complain about this team not being competitive, because it doesn't matter how it looks. A team that can muck up a game and make it one for themselves, I don't care how they win. I don't care how they do that. Just give me a chance. Just give me a chance to see a competitive game in the fourth quarter. And that's what the Texans are doing. And that's something I'm not going to say I would expect, but if they could do it against a hungry Chargers team, a team that if they're healthy enough to even feel this way, like, hey man, we have something to prove, and you're not about to make us 1-3 and get your first one of the season. Oh no. If they're able to do that, then I really have, my expectation level for this team continuing to be competitive, not necessarily good, but competitive going forward, is just that hope.
Well, that's it. I think you got to remember last year we came from a position of complete abject uncompetitiveness, blowouts, team, long periods, almost 3/4 in games where the game was done and dusted. So to be in this position, I think, you got to take a little bit of stock, exactly what Shaun said there. And let's look forward to hopefully some more positive outs from our quarterback, more watchable offense. I think we're kind of there where we think Mills could take us. But you never know. He might surprise you, and that's why you play these games. So thank you very much to Shaun Bijani for his time joining us this week on the Turn Up For What podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, share, like, comment, all that good stuff. If you listen on one of your favourite platforms in the audio version, share it on, do all that kind of good stuff for us as we try to grow this season. Apologies again for missing last week. Still not quite there. The voice isn't quite back to full capacity, but we'll keep grinding just as we'll expect the Texans to do, and hopefully we'll be back next week to talk a bit more of a positive outcome from the Chargers. But thanks again for listening, and we'll speak to you again next week.